My uncles said my grandfather's ranch was worthless. They said the land was barren, the house was falling apart, and the taxes were eating it alive. They said I should take the $5,000 and walk away, start fresh somewhere else. Forget about the past. But when I found the surveyor's stake behind the old barn, its orange flag bright and new against the overgrown grass, I knew they were lying. What they didn't know was what my grandfather had buried there, waiting for me all along. And it wasn't money, it was a choice. If you've ever felt like your entire future was a story written by someone else, I need you to stay with me. Because this is about finding the courage to pick up the pen and write your own ending. The day I turned 18 felt less like a birthday and more like an eviction notice. It was the day the state of Montana officially washed its hands of me. 12 years in the foster system, 7 different homes since my mother died when I was 6. And all of it came down to a beige-walled office that smelled of stale coffee and industrial cleaning solution. The fluorescent lights above me flickered and buzzed, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow. The plastic chair beneath me was cold and hard, the kind designed to make you uncomfortable, to remind you that you weren't welcome to stay long. Mrs. Patterson, my final caseworker, slid a manila envelope across her laminated desk. The sound it made was soft and final, like the closing of a book nobody wanted to read anymore. "This is it, Jessamine," she said, her voice attempting a warmth that the room seemed to absorb and neutralize. "You're an adult now." Jessamine. My full name. Nobody called me that except people reading from official documents. To everyone else, I was Jessa. To myself, I was mostly invisible. I opened the envelope with fingers that didn't quite feel like my own. Inside was a birth certificate I'd seen a dozen times, a social security card with my name printed in faded ink, and a set of old tarnished keys on a simple steel ring. They felt impossibly heavy in my palm, like they were made of something denser than metal, like they were made of history. "The keys to your grandfather's property," Mrs. Patterson explained, her tone clipped and professional. It was the tone of someone closing a file. My file. I had been a stack of papers, a series of problems to be managed, a bed to be filled in one group home after another, and now I was a closed case. "The estate has been managed by your uncles until you came of age," she continued. "They'll be in touch about the details." Her words hung in the air between us, but I barely heard them. I was staring at the keys, thinking about the last time I'd held something that belonged to my grandfather. I was 5 years old, the summer before my mother got sick. He had pressed a smooth river stone into my palm, his hands rough and warm around mine. "For luck," he'd said, his voice gravelly but gentle. "Keep it safe, little one." I still had that stone. It was in my backpack right now, wrapped in a sock to keep it from getting scratched. 12 years of foster homes, and I had never lost it. "Is there anything else?" I asked, and my voice came out smaller than I intended. Mrs. Patterson's expression softened, just for a moment. Maybe she saw something in my face that reminded her I was still just a kid, despite what the calendar said, or maybe she was just tired and ready for her lunch break. "There's a small amount in a trust account," she said, "about $300. It should help you get started." $300, plus the $87 I had saved from my part-time job at the grocery store. Less than $400 to start a life. I thanked her because that's what you do, and I walked out of that building into the thin March morning. The sky was the color of old dishwater, and a light drizzle was falling, the kind that doesn't seem like much until you realize you're soaked through. The keys were cold against my skin as I stood on the sidewalk, watching the cars pass by. Everyone was going somewhere. Everyone had a destination, a purpose, a place where they belonged. I had an address to a property I barely remembered, in a town I'd never heard of, left to me by a man I'd met exactly once in my life. The phone call came that afternoon. I was sitting on a bench in the bus station, watching the rain streak down the windows and trying to figure out which direction to even walk. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and the name on the screen made my stomach clench into a tight knot. Garrett Thornwood, my uncle, my mother's older brother. A man I had never met in person, who had never once visited me in foster care, never sent a birthday card, never made any effort to be part of my life. But according to the paperwork, he and his brother Preston had been managing my grandfather's estate for the past 2 years, ever since Grandpa Emmett had died alone in that farmhouse. With no one to hold his hand. I hesitated before answering. There was something about his name that felt like a warning, though I couldn't have explained why. Hello? Jessamine. His voice was smooth and confident, with an undercurrent of impatience that he didn't quite manage to hide. Happy birthday. I hope Mrs. Patterson explained everything? She gave me the keys, I said carefully. Good, good. He paused and I could hear the faint click of a keyboard in the background. He was multitasking. I wasn't important enough for his full attention. Listen, I know this is a big day for you. Lots of changes. Your Uncle Preston and I have been talking, and we want to make this transition as smooth as possible. I didn't say anything. I'd learned a long time ago that silence was safer than words. Let people talk. And they usually revealed more than they intended. Here's the situation, Garrett continued, his voice shifting into what I imagined was his lawyer tone. Smooth, reasonable, the voice of a man who was used to getting what he wanted. That ranch your grandfather left you, it's in pretty sorry shape. He let it go the last few years of his life. The taxes are piling up, the roof needs replacing, and frankly, the land itself is worthless. It's hard-scrabble country out there. Nothing grows. He paused again, letting the weight of the problems settle onto my shoulders. I could almost picture him on the other end of the line, leaning back in an expensive office chair, looking out over some city skyline, already counting this conversation as handled. But because you're family, he said, and the word family sounded strange coming from him, like a foreign language he'd learned but never quite mastered. We found a buyer, $5,000. $5,000. It sounded like a fortune, and nothing at the same time. Enough to find a cheap apartment for a few months. Enough to exist, barely, while I figured out what came next. But not enough to build anything. Not enough to become anyone. And there was something about the way he said it. Something too eager beneath the rehearsed concern. Something that tasted like a lie. That's a generous offer, Jessa, Garrett pressed, and I noticed he'd switched to the familiar form of my name, like we were suddenly close. Like we were family who actually knew each other. Honestly, it's more than the place is worth. They're mostly just paying for the acreage, and even that's not good for much. Preston can have the papers drawn up by the end of the week. You sign, we wire you the money, and you can move on. Start fresh. Move on. Start fresh. The words echoed in my head like a bad song I couldn't stop humming. That's all I'd been doing for 12 years. Moving on. Starting fresh in a new school, a new bedroom, with a new set of temporary parents who looked at me with a mixture of pity and obligation. The ranch, as worthless as he claimed it was the only thing that wasn't temporary. It was the last piece of my grandfather, the last piece of my mother, the last piece of my own history that hadn't been taken away or lost or given up on. I want to see it first, I said. The words came out quieter than I intended, but they came out steady. There was a beat of silence on the other end of the line. I could feel his surprise through the phone, though he covered it quickly. See it? Jessa, there's nothing to see. It's a wreck. We're trying to save you the heartache, not to mention the bus fare. I want to see it, I repeated. My voice was stronger this time. I could feel something flickering in my chest. Something stubborn and fierce that I'd thought the foster system had beaten out of me a long time ago. The silence stretched between us, taut as a wire. When Garrett spoke again, his voice had changed. The warmth was gone. The smooth lawyer tone was gone. What remained was cold, sharp, and ugly. Fine, it's your inheritance. Do what you want. The address is on the county documents we sent to your caseworker. He paused, and when he continued, there was something in his voice that made the hair stand up on the back of my neck. Eddie, don't say I didn't warn you. The line went dead. I sat there in the bus station, the phone still pressed to my ear, watching the rain darken the concrete outside. My hand was shaking, though I couldn't tell if it was from fear or anger or something else entirely. He hadn't warned me. He had threatened me. And in that moment, sitting on that hard plastic bench with my entire life in a backpack and less than $400 to my name, I knew I had to go. I had to see what they were so eager for me to give away. The bus ride was a journey through descending layers of civilization. It started in Billings, all gas stations and fast food restaurants, and the constant hum of traffic. The bus smelled of diesel and old leather, and the seats were worn thin by thousands of journeys just like mine. People getting on, people getting off, and everyone going somewhere that mattered to them. Then the bus moved through the suburbs, the houses getting farther apart, the strip malls giving way to open fields. Then it turned onto smaller highways, and the landscape began to assert itself with a quiet, implacable power. The straight lines of human design gave way to the curves of hills and the jagged silhouettes of pine trees against a sky that grew darker with every mile. The Rocky Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still white with snow even in March, and I pressed my forehead against the cold window and watched them grow larger and more real. This was the land my grandfather had loved, the land my mother had grown up on before she'd run away to the city and met my father and had me and died of an illness that took her in 3 months flat. Leaving me alone in the world at 6 years old? I'd always wondered why she'd left. Looking out at all that empty space, all that sky, I thought maybe I was starting to understand. There was something terrifying about that much room, that much silence, that much space to be alone with your own thoughts. The other passengers thinned out at each small town stop. By the time the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that I'd never seen in the city, it was just me and the driver. He was a wiry man with a face like a road map of back roads, deep lines carved by wind and sun, and years of squinting at distant horizons. "Getting off at the Crestwood Falls Crossroads?" he asked, catching my eye in the rearview mirror. "That's what the ticket says." He nodded slowly, his eyes returning to the road. "Not much out there." You got family?" "Something like that," I said. He seemed to accept this and fell silent, his attention returning to the road that unspooled before us in the fading light like a ribbon leading into the unknown. The bus wheezed to a stop, and the hydraulic hiss of the doors opening sounded unnaturally loud in the profound quiet. I grabbed my backpack and stepped out into the cold, damp air. It smelled different here, not like exhaust and garbage and too many people in too small a space. It smelled of wet earth and pine needles and something else, something I couldn't name. Distance, maybe, or time, or the particular loneliness of places that have been waiting for someone to come home. The bus pulled away, its red tail lights shrinking until they were swallowed by the dusk. And then I was alone. Truly, utterly alone. I stood at the crossroads and looked around. There was a gas station with a convenience store attached, its single light flickering weakly against the coming darkness like a candle about to gutter out. A hand-painted sign advertised live bait and cold beer. Beyond that, there was nothing but the road stretching in both directions and the mountains rising black against the deep blue sky, their peaks touching the first emerging stars. According to the map Mrs. Patterson had printed for me, the ranch was another 4 miles down an unpaved road that branched off to the north. 4 miles. In the dark. With nothing but my backpack and my dying phone battery, and no idea what I was walking toward. The $5,000 felt very far away, but so did the fear. It was being replaced by something else, something colder and harder. Determination. I bought a bottle of water and a stale granola bar from the woman behind the counter. She was maybe 55, with steel gray hair pulled back in a ponytail, and eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by anything. Her name tag said May. "Long way from anywhere," she observed, not quite a question. "I'm going to the Thornwood place," I said. Something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, curiosity, and something else I couldn't quite identify. "Emmett's place?" She tilted her head, studying me with new interest. "You must be the granddaughter. He talked about you." My heart clenched in my chest. "He did. All the time." Her voice softened. "Said you were out there somewhere, and he couldn't get to you. The system wouldn't let him through." I didn't trust myself to speak. I just nodded and paid for my supplies and walked back out into the night, her words echoing in my head. "He talked about you. All the time." The road was gravel and mud, and my worn-out sneakers slipped with every step. The sky had gone from blue to purple to black, and the stars were coming out, more stars than I had ever seen in my life. The city had hidden them from me, I realized. All those years, all those nights lying awake in unfamiliar beds, staring at unfamiliar ceilings. And I had never known the sky could look like this. The silence was a living thing. It pressed against my ears, broken only by the crunch of my footsteps and the occasional cry of an owl somewhere in the darkness. I'd grown up with the city's constant noise, a symphony of sirens and traffic and voices that never stopped. This quiet was unnerving. It made me feel small and exposed and completely, terrifyingly free. I walked for what felt like hours. My legs ached. My backpack dug into my shoulders. The granola bar sat like a stone in my stomach, and the water was half gone. And then I saw it. A rusted wrought iron gate hanging crookedly on one hinge. The metalwork at the top spelled out a name, though some of the letters had fallen away over the years. TH_RNW__D. Beyond it, a long, weed-choked driveway led to a dark shape silhouetted against the star-filled sky. The house. My grandfather's house. My house. I pushed the gate open, and it screamed in protest, the sound echoing in the stillness like an announcement. After all these years, someone was finally home. The driveway was long, maybe a quarter mile, lined with old cottonwood trees whose bare branches reached toward the sky like skeletal fingers. With every step, I felt the weight of the moment pressing down on me. This was it. This was everything. Whatever waited at the end of this path would determine the rest of my life. The house emerged from the darkness slowly, like a photograph developing in a tray of chemicals. It was a simple two-story farmhouse, its white paint peeled and grayed by years of sun and rain. The porch sagged in the middle, and several windows had been boarded up with plywood that was itself starting to rot. The shutters hung at odd angles, and the whole structure seemed to lean slightly to the left, as if it were tired and looking for somewhere to rest. To the left stood the barn. It was massive, bigger than the house, and its gambrel roof bowed in the center like the back of an old horse that had carried too many burdens for too many years. One of the great doors hung open at a drunken angle, creating a dark mouth that seemed to swallow the starlight. Uncle Garrett was right about one thing. It was a wreck. But as I stood there in the overgrown yard, looking up at this broken-down house that had belonged to my grandfather, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, maybe ever. I felt like I was home. I fumbled with the keys, my fingers numb with cold and trembling, with something that might have been fear or might have been hope. The first key didn't fit, neither did the second, but the third one slid into the lock with a soft click that seemed to echo through the empty house. The lock resisted, grinding with rust and disuse, but with a final desperate shove, out it turned. The door swung inward with a low groan, opening into a darkness that smelled of dust and mice and memory. I stood on the threshold, a girl who was now legally an adult, a stranger who was now technically a homeowner, and I took my first step into the inheritance I was supposed to despise. The air inside was thick and cold, colder than outside. It was the kind of chill that sinks deep into your bones, the cold of a place that has been without warmth or life for a very long time. I fumbled along the wall until my fingers found a light switch. I flipped it up. Nothing. Of course, the power had been shut off, probably years ago. I pulled out my phone, wincing at the 7% battery, and switched on the flashlight. The thin beam cut a nervous path through the gloom, when illuminating motes of dust that swirled like tiny spirits disturbed from their rest. The light fell on furniture shrouded in white sheets, ghostly shapes that might have been a sofa, armchairs, a coffee table. I moved further into the house, my footsteps echoing on the bare wooden floors. The flashlight beam slid over faded floral wallpaper, water stained in the corners. It illuminated a stone fireplace, the hearth filled with blackened ancient ash. This was the living room. I could feel the ghost of a memory here, a flicker of warmth from that fireplace, the sound of a voice I could almost remember. My grandfather's voice, reading to me from a book of fairy tales while I sat on his lap. But the memory was faint, like a dream I'd had as a child and mostly forgotten. I found the kitchen through a swinging door, and the linoleum floor was cracked and peeling. A thick layer of dust coated every surface. A calendar on the wall was still turned to September 2 years ago. A coffee cup sat by the sink, a brown ring dried at the bottom. It was as if someone had walked out one morning and never come back, because someone had. My grandfather had died here, alone, with no one to hold his hand or tell him goodbye. He had died waiting for a granddaughter who never came, because the system had decided she belonged somewhere else. I found a candle in one of the drawers and lit it with a book of matches that had somehow stayed dry. The small flame pushed back the darkness a little, enough for me to see more of the room, more decay, more abandonment, more evidence of a life that had ended without ceremony or witness. I was too tired to explore further, like too tired to think about the implications of what I'd inherited or what I was going to do next. I found a relatively clean spot on the old sofa, wrapped myself in a dusty blanket I'd pulled from a closet, and fell asleep to the sound of the wind moaning through the gaps in the walls. My last thought before consciousness slipped away was of my grandfather's voice, rough and warm, pressing that river stone into my palm when I was 5 years old. For luck, he'd said. I was going to need it. I woke to gray light filtering through grimy windows and the sound of birds singing somewhere outside. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. The ceiling above me was unfamiliar, stained with watermarks that looked like continents on an ancient map. Then I remembered. I sat up slowly, my body aching from the uncomfortable night on the old sofa. And the blanket smelled of dust and mothballs and something else, something faintly sweet. Maybe lavender, maybe the perfume of a grandmother I had never known. The house looked worse in the daylight. I could see now just how bad the decay really was. The walls were cracked, the floors warped. Spiderwebs hung in every corner like gauze curtains, and I could see evidence of mice everywhere, their droppings scattered across the counters like dark punctuation marks. The ceiling in one corner sagged ominously, and when I looked up the stairs, I could see daylight coming through holes in the roof. My uncle's words echoed in my head. $5,000. Worthless. A burden. Start fresh somewhere else. Looking around at this monument to neglect, I couldn't argue with them. What was I going to do here? I was 18 years old, alone in the world, with no skills, no money, and no plan. I couldn't fix a leaking roof or restore a crumbling foundation. I was just a kid playing house in a ruin. I walked out onto the sagging porch, my breath fogging in the cold morning air, and looked around at my inheritance in the early light. The ranch was nestled in a small valley, surrounded by low rolling hills covered in a mix of scrub oak and pine. The land itself was rocky and uneven, but there was a kind of rugged, untamed beauty to it that the darkness had hidden from me last night. The mountains rose in the distance, their peaks touched with the gold of the rising sun, and the sky above was a pale, clean blue that seemed to go on forever. It wasn't worthless, it was wild. My eyes drifted to the barn, and something cold moved through my stomach. The barn was huge, a great gambrel-roofed structure that had once been painted red, but had faded to a rusty pink. It looked like a giant on the verge of collapse, its roof bowed, its walls leaning at angles that couldn't be safe. But something made me walk toward it anyway. The grass was knee-high and wet with dew, soaking through my already ruined sneakers with every step. As I got closer, I could see the extent of the decay. Entire sections of siding were missing, revealing the skeletal frame beneath. The great doors hung at odd angles, one of them torn completely off its upper track. I circled around the massive structure, not quite ready to go inside, and that's when I saw it. Behind the barn, about 20 yards out in the overgrown field, was a flash of color that didn't belong. It was bright orange, almost fluorescent, was standing out against the brown and green of the neglected landscape like a warning flare. I walked over to it, my heart beginning to beat faster with each step. It was a survey stake, a metal rod driven into the ground with an orange plastic flag tied to the top, the kind that land surveyors use to mark property boundaries or points of interest. And it was new. The metal was still shiny, untouched by rust or weather. The orange flag was bright and clean, unfaded by the sun. This hadn't been here for years. This had been placed recently, maybe weeks ago, maybe days. I looked around, but there were no other markers visible, just this one solitary stake, driven deep into the earth in a seemingly random spot in the middle of an overgrown field behind a collapsing barn. Why would anyone survey one tiny patch of a worthless property? The question sat in my stomach like a stone. My uncles had told me this land was worthless. They told me nobody would want it. They told me $5,000 was a generous offer for a pile of dirt that wasn't good for anything. But someone had been here recently with surveying equipment. Someone had marked this exact spot with a brand new stake. The $5,000 offer suddenly felt like an insult. The easy path was still there. I could turn around, go back to that gas station, call my uncle, and tell him he was right. I could sign the papers, take the money, and disappear into the world like all the other foster kids who aged out of the system with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a pocket full of broken promises. But standing there in the cold morning air, staring at that orange flag fluttering in the breeze, I knew I couldn't do it. There was a story here, a secret, and I wasn't leaving until I understood what my uncles were so desperate to hide. I turned back toward the house, a new purpose burning in my chest. It was time to find some answers. I spent the rest of that day searching. I went through every room, every closet, every drawer. I swept away cobwebs and disturbed mice and covered myself in a thick layer of dust that made me sneeze until my eyes watered. The house was a graveyard of someone else's life, filled with objects that told a story I could only partly understand. In the master bedroom upstairs, I found my grandfather's clothes still hanging in the closet. They smelled of cedar and old wool and something else, something that might have been pipe tobacco. His boots stood by the door, worn and muddy, as if he'd just stepped out of them. A pair of reading glasses sat on the nightstand next to a well-thumbed paperback novel, a Western with a cowboy on the cover. I sat on the edge of his bed and held those glasses in my hands, trying to feel some connection to the man who had worn them. But he was mostly a stranger to me, a name, a face I barely remembered from a single summer afternoon when I was 5 years old. That summer, the summer before everything fell apart. I remembered fragments, the smell of horses and fresh-cut hay, the warmth of the sun on my face as we sat on the porch eating watermelon, his voice rough and gentle, telling me that this land had secrets, that someday I would understand. I went through his drawers, his closet, the boxes stacked in dusty corners. I found old photographs, most of them faded and curling at the edges. Pictures of a young couple who must have been my grandparents on their wedding day, standing in front of this very house when it was new and proud. A woman who looked like my mother, laughing at something outside the frame. A man in overalls standing in front of the barn, back when it was painted red and standing straight. I found letters too. Dozens of them, rubber-banded together in neat stacks. Most were from the power company, the tax assessor, various businesses. But some were personal, letters from old friends, letters from my mother written in her cramped handwriting, telling her father about her life in the city. I read those letters until the light through the window began to fade, my mother's voice coming through the pages like a ghost reaching across time. She wrote about her job waitressing at a diner, her tiny apartment with the radiator that clanked all night, the man she'd met who made her laugh, who would become my father. Then about the pregnancy, about me, about her dreams for the future. The letters stopped abruptly, about a year before she died. I wondered what had happened, what silence had fallen between them that had never been broken. The study was the last room I searched. It was a small room off the living room, dominated by a large roll-top desk made of dark wood that gleamed even under the layer of dust. Unlike the rest of the house, this room felt different. It felt lived in, used, important. Books lined the walls, old volumes on agriculture, animal husbandry, land management. But there were other books too, books that seemed out of place, books on geology, books on mining, books on mineral rights and property law. I frowned, pulling one of the geology texts from the shelf. It fell open to a page that had been marked with a slip of paper. The chapter was about something called lithium deposits. Lithium, I knew that word. It was in batteries, in phones, in laptops, in the electric cars that were becoming more common every year. It was valuable, increasingly valuable. A cold feeling began to spread through my chest. I sat down at my grandfather's desk and began going through the drawers. Most contained what you'd expect: pens, paper clips, old receipts yellowed with age. But the bottom drawer was locked. I went back through the keys on my ring until I found one that fit. The lock was stiff, fighting me, but it eventually gave way with a reluctant click. Inside the drawer, In underneath a stack of old bank statements was a wooden box. It was simple, unadorned, about the size of a shoebox. When I lifted the lid, my hands were trembling. The first thing I saw was an envelope with my name written on the front. Jessamine, my full name, in handwriting that was shaky but legible. My grandfather's handwriting. I stared at it for a long moment, afraid to touch it. This was it. This was what I'd been searching for without knowing it. I could feel it in my bones, the way you can feel a storm coming before you see the clouds. I opened the envelope carefully, as if the paper might dissolve at my touch. Inside were several pages covered in that same trembling script. A letter. A letter from a dead man to a granddaughter he'd barely known but had never stopped loving. My dearest Jessa, it began. If you are reading this, when then two things have happened. I have passed from this world and you have come home. I am sorry for both. I am sorry I will not be there to see you become the woman I know you will be. And I am sorry for the mess I have left you to clean up. But I need you to be strong now, sweetheart. I need you to be smarter than they think you are, because the wolves are at the door and they are wearing your uncle's faces. I stopped reading. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The wolves are at the door. I forced myself to continue. Garrett and Preston, my own sons, have always seen this land as nothing more than a dollar sign. They have none of their grandmother's love for this place, none of my respect for the earth beneath our feet. They see rocks and dirt. I see a legacy. They see a burden. I see a home. For years, they have been pressuring me to sell. When my health started to fail, their pressure became demands. They knew I was leaving the ranch to you, Jessa. It was the only thing of value I had to give you. Not for the money, but for the roots. A place to stand. A place where you belong. They did not want you to have it. Tears were rolling down my cheeks now. I didn't bother to wipe them away. They think this land is worthless on the surface, and in some ways they are right. The soil is poor for farming. The terrain is too rough for large-scale ranching. They look at those hills and see nothing but obstacles. But they are fools. They are short-sighted and greedy, and they have been waiting for me to die so they can pick the bones clean. Years ago, a geologist friend of mine did me a favor. He ran a deep ground survey of the valley just to see what was under all these rocks. What he found was unexpected. I have the report. It is safe. But the real value, Jessa, is not just what is in the ground. It is the ground itself. This place can be a sanctuary. It can be a future. It can be the home you never had. Do not let them take that from you for a handful of silver. I sat there in my grandfather's chair, his letter in my hands, tears streaming down my face. I cried for myself, for the years I'd spent being shuffled from home to home, never belonging anywhere. I cried for my mother who had run away from this place and never found her way back. And I cried for my grandfather who had spent his final years alone, holding on to this land and waiting for a granddaughter the system wouldn't let him reach. But I also felt something else building beneath the grief. Something hot and fierce. Anger. The letter continued on the next page, and I wiped my eyes so I could read it. I could not leave everything in one place. It was too risky. Garrett and Preston have been through this house. I am certain of it. They look, but they do not see. There is a second box, Jessa. It contains everything you need to fight them. The survey report, legal documents, the name of a man you can trust. I have hidden it where they would never think to look. In the heart of the ranch, the place where I did my real work. Go to the barn. In the northwest corner, there is a tack room. From the doorway, count 7 floorboards in. The 7th board is loose. Underneath, you will find what you need. Trust me, sweetheart, and trust yourself. You are stronger than you know. He signed it simply. Grandpa Emmett. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into my pocket. Then I got up from the desk and walked to the window, looking out at the barn silhouetted against the darkening sky. The tack room. The 7th floorboard. My grandfather had prepared for this. He had known his sons would try to cheat me. He had known they would paint the ranch as a ruin, a liability to scare me into signing it away for nothing, and he had left me the weapons to fight back. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The barn stood dark and massive against the dying light, its broken roof line like the spine of some ancient creature. I wasn't going to wait until morning. The barn smelled of old hay and rotting wood, animal sweat and time. It was the smell of decades of hard work, of animals born and raised, of seasons turning one into another, while the world outside changed in ways this old building could never understand. My phone was dead now, but I'd found an old flashlight in the study, its battery still holding a weak charge. I swept the beam across the cavernous space, my heart pounding in my chest. The main floor was littered with debris, broken tools, scraps of lumber, rusted pieces of machinery that I couldn't identify. High above the bowed roof was a web of shadows, and I could see slivers of twilight sky through holes in the shingles. To my right, a rickety staircase led up to a hayloft. To my left, along the north wall, were a series of stalls for horses or cattle, their doors hanging open. And at the far end of that wall, just as the letter described, was a small enclosed room, the tack room. I made my way toward it, or stepping carefully over the debris. Every rustle and creak from the old structure sounded like it was alive, breathing around me, watching me with the patience of something very old. The door to the tack room was closed, swollen shut by years of moisture and temperature changes. I had to throw my shoulder against it twice before it gave way, swinging inward with a protesting shriek. The room was small, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet. The walls were lined with hooks where dusty, cracked leather harnesses and bridles still hung like relics in a museum. A saddle sat slumped over a wooden stand in the corner, its leather dry and split. The smell in here was even stronger, the concentrated essence of horses and leather and the sweat of working men. I stood in the doorway and pointed the flashlight at the floor. The floorboards were wide, with thick planks of oak, dark with age and wear. They were covered in a layer of dirt and hay and mouse droppings, but I could see them clearly enough. 1, 2, 3. I counted carefully, placing my foot on each board as I went. 4, 5, 6. My heart was pounding now, so hard I could feel it in my throat. 7. I stopped and knelt down, examining the 7th board. It looked the same as all the others, weathered and worn. I tried to pry at the edge with my fingers, but it wouldn't budge. My nails scraped uselessly against the wood, breaking and tearing. For a moment, panic rose in my chest. Had I misunderstood? Was this some kind of cruel joke? A final disappointment from a grandfather who had abandoned me just like everyone else? Then I stopped myself. No. Emmett Thornwood had been a practical man. He had been a rancher, a worker, a man who built things with his hands. He wouldn't have made this impossible. I looked around the room with my flashlight and spotted an old crowbar leaning against the far wall. It was heavy and cold in my hands, rusted but still solid. I wedged the tip into the crack between the 7th and 8th boards and put all my weight on it. For a moment, nothing happened. Then with a groan of tortured wood and a screech of old nails, the board began to lift. I dropped the crowbar and pulled the board up with my hands, setting it aside. Beneath it was a dark space, a hole in the floor about 2 feet deep. And sitting in that hole, covered in a layer of dust, was a metal box. It was an old military-style ammunition can, painted olive drab, with sturdy latches on the front. It was heavy when I lifted it, heavy enough that I had to use both hands to drag it out of the hole and set it on the tack room floor. My hands were shaking as I fumbled with the latches. They were stiff with age, but they eventually gave way with a metallic snap. The lid swung open. The box was not filled with cash or gold. It was filled with paper. Stacks of documents held together with rubber bands. A thick bound report with technical diagrams and charts. Yellowed newspaper clippings. And on top of it all, another envelope with my name on it. I reached for the envelope first. This letter was shorter, more direct. Jessa, it began, if you found this, then you passed the first test. You chose to fight instead of run. I am proud of you, sweetheart. Inside this box is the ammunition you will need. The first document is the full geological survey. Do not worry about the technical language. The important part is highlighted. Read it and you will understand what your uncles are really after. The second is a file of correspondence. Letters between myself and a company called Nova Lithium, dating back 5 years. They show the company's interest in this land and their offers to buy it. Your uncles found out about this, and their greed consumed them. They have been waiting for me to die so they could steal it from you. The final item is the most important. It is the contact information for Harding Calloway. He is an attorney in Whitmore, about 40 miles from here. He was my lawyer and my friend for 30 years. He is a good man, an honest man, in a profession full of sharks. I have already paid him a retainer to represent you. He knows the whole story. He is waiting for your call. Call him, Jessa. Listen to what he says. And whatever you do, do not speak to your uncles again without him present. This is your fight now. I have given you the weapons. Go and win the war. All my love, Grandpa Emmett. I put down the letter and reached for the geological survey with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. The report was thick, full of charts and graphs and technical language that went over my head. But then I found the section he'd mentioned, the one with yellow highlighter marking the critical passages. My eyes scanned the words, and the world seemed to shift beneath my feet. Significant commercially viable deposits of lithium located in the shale formations underlying the property, particularly concentrated in the northwest quadrant. Estimated reserves valued at $15 to $20 million at current market prices. To $15 to $20 million. The number was so large it didn't seem real. It was a number from a different universe, a different life, a different story entirely. The survey stake. It was in the northwest quadrant, behind the barn. Someone had already been out here, confirming the location. My uncles must have had their own survey done. They must have verified what my grandfather's report showed. They knew exactly what was under this land, and they had tried to buy it from me for $5,000. The file of correspondence made it even worse. I read letter after letter from Nova Lithium, printed on expensive corporate stationery. The offers started at $500,000 and climbed steadily higher. 800,000, 1.2 million, 2 million, 3 million. And every letter was marked with my grandfather's handwritten note, declined. He hadn't wanted to sell. He had wanted to leave me a home, not a strip mine. He had wanted to give me something to build on, not something to cash in. I sat on the dirty floor of that tack room, surrounded by the evidence of my uncle's betrayal, and I felt something change inside me. For 18 years, I had been powerless. I had been a passenger in my own life, moved from place to place by forces I couldn't control. I had learned to expect nothing, to hope for nothing, to accept whatever crumbs the world threw my way. But not anymore. I had the truth now. I had the proof. I had weapons. And I was going to war. The next morning, I walked the 4 miles back to the gas station at the crossroads. My phone was dead, but there was a payphone outside the convenience store, an ancient relic that still somehow worked. May was behind the counter again when I walked in to get change. She looked up and studied my face with those knowing eyes. "You look like you found something," she said. "I did." She was quiet for a moment, then leaned closer across the counter, her voice dropping. "There's something you should know," she said. "About 3 months ago, before your grandfather passed, 2 men came through town. City men, expensive suits, asking questions about the Thornwood property. They hired a surveying crew out of Billings." My blood ran cold. What did they look like? One was tall, gray hair, talked like a lawyer. The other was shorter, heavier, had a temper on him. And he got into it with Joe at the hardware store over something petty, Garrett and Preston. They had been here 3 months before my grandfather died. They had already been surveying the land. They had already been planning. "They knew," I whispered. "They knew about the lithium before he was even gone." May nodded slowly, her face grim. "I didn't put it together until you walked in yesterday. But yes, honey, I think they did." I thanked her and walked out to the payphone with a handful of quarters. The number on Harding Calloway's business card was faded but legible. I dialed it with trembling fingers, feeding quarters into the slot. The phone rang 3 times before a voice answered. It was a calm, low voice, the kind that sounded like it had seen everything and wasn't surprised by anything. "Harding Calloway's office." "Mr. Calloway, my name is Jessamine Thornwood. My grandfather was Emmett Thornwood." There was a pause on the line. Then his voice changed, warming slightly. "Emmett's granddaughter. I've been expecting your call. I was sorry to hear about your grandfather's passing. He was a good man, one of the best I've ever known. Something loosened in my chest. The tightness I hadn't even realized was there. He said you could help me, I said, and my voice cracked slightly. He said you knew the story. I do, Calloway confirmed. I have copies of everything in my files. Emmett was a careful man. He knew his sons better than they knew themselves, and he made sure you would be protected. He paused, and I could hear the creak of a chair on the other end of the line. Tell me, Miss Thornwood, what do you want to do? It was the most important question anyone had ever asked me. What did I want? The answer came to me as clear and certain as if it had been waiting inside me all along, just waiting for someone to ask. I don't want to sell, I said. Not to my uncles, not to the lithium company. This is my home. I want to keep it. I could hear the smile in his voice. That's exactly what Emmett hoped you'd say. He always told me you had good earth in you, just like him. All right, Miss Thornwood, let me tell you what we're going to do. For the next 30 minutes, he laid out a plan. It was clear and methodical, a roadmap through terrain I had never navigated before. He explained the legal steps we would take, the documents we would file, the challenges we could expect. Your uncles will not take this lying down, he warned. They've been planning this for years. They have money and connections and lawyers of their own. This fight will be long and it will be hard. I understand, I said. Do you? His voice was gentle but serious. You're 18 years old, alone in the world, and you're about to take on two grown men with every advantage. There's no shame in taking a settlement and walking away. A lot of people would. I thought about the foster homes, the caseworkers, the families who had taken me in and then given me up when I became inconvenient. I thought about all the times I had been moved along, passed over, forgotten. I'm not a lot of people, I said. I'm Emmett Thornwood's granddaughter. He was quiet for a moment. Then he chuckled, a warm sound that came through the phone like a handshake. Yes, you are, he said. Yes, you certainly are. All right, Miss Thornwood, let's go to war. If you've been following my story this far, I need you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button. Because what happens next changed everything, and I think you need to hear it. I think you need to know that when the world tells you that you're worthless, when your own family tries to steal your future, you can still fight back. You can still win, but you have to choose to fight, so subscribe. And ask yourself this, have you ever had to fight for something that was rightfully yours? Have you ever had someone underestimate you because of your age, your circumstances, your past? Tell me in the comments, because your story matters too. Now let me tell you what happened when I finally faced my uncles. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. Harding Calloway had advised me to cut off all contact with Garrett and Preston until we had our legal strategy in place. But I wanted them to know. I wanted them to understand that I wasn't the helpless orphan they thought I was. I called Garrett from the payphone outside May's store, my grandfather's letter in my pocket like armor. Jessamine, his voice was smooth, confident. I was wondering when I'd hear from you. Have you come to your senses about the property? I know about the lithium, Uncle Garrett. The silence that followed was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. I have the geological survey, I continued, keeping my voice steady even though my heart was racing. I have 5 years of correspondence between Grandpa and Nova Lithium. I know exactly what this land is worth. And I know you've been trying to steal it from me. When he finally spoke, his voice had transformed completely. All pretense of warmth was stripped away. What remained was cold and sharp and ugly. Listen carefully, you stupid girl. He spat the words like venom. You have no idea what you're dealing with. I have lawyers who will bury you in paperwork. I have connections in every courthouse in this state. You're nothing. You're a foster kid with no family, no money, and no future. Sign the papers and take what we're offering, or I will destroy you. My lawyer is Harding Calloway, I said. You'll be hearing from him. I hung up before he could respond. My hand was shaking when I put down the receiver, but I was smiling. The next 9 months were the hardest of my life. Garrett and Preston filed their first legal challenge within a week of my phone call. They claimed that Emmett Thornwood had been mentally incompetent when he wrote his will. They claimed that I was an unstable minor who had been manipulated by a predatory lawyer. They dragged up every foster home I'd ever been in, every school I'd struggled at, Every time I'd been labeled a problem child by adults who didn't want to deal with me. Their lawyers were expensive and aggressive, a whole team of them in matching suits with matching sneers. Every motion they filed was designed to exhaust me, to drain my resources, to make me give up and take whatever they offered just to make it stop. But Harding Calloway was better. He had been preparing for this fight since before my grandfather died. He had affidavits from doctors who had examined Emmett in his final months, confirming that his mind was sharp to the end. He had character witnesses who had known my grandfather for decades, who would testify to his intelligence and his clear intentions. And he had something my uncles didn't expect, evidence of their conspiracy. Calloway had done his own investigation in the months since Emmett's death. He had discovered that Garrett and Preston had been in contact with Nova Lithium months before their father passed. They had already negotiated a preliminary deal to sell the mineral rights the moment they gained control of the property. They hadn't just been waiting for their father to die. They had been counting down the days. The legal battle played out in courtrooms and conference rooms, in filings and depositions and endless stacks of paperwork. But while the lawyers fought their war, I was fighting my own. I had decided to stay on the ranch. It was a ridiculous decision by any rational measure. I was 18 years old with no farming experience, no money and no practical skills. The house was falling apart. The barn was a safety hazard. The land was overgrown and neglected. But it was mine. And for the first time in my life, I had something to build. May Sutner was the first to help me. When I walked into her store to buy supplies, she took one look at the list in my hand and shook her head. "You're going to need more than nails and paint to fix up that place, honey." "I know," I said, "but I have to start somewhere." She studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Emmett kept that place going on pure stubbornness for years after your grandmother died. He'd be glad to know someone's there again." She paused. "I'll put together a care package. Some food, some basic supplies. You can pay me back when you're on your feet." It was the first act of kindness I'd received in longer than I could remember. I had to leave the store quickly because I didn't want her to see me cry. Others followed. Gus Delacroix ran the hardware store in the nearest town, a weathered man in his 60s who had worked on ranches his whole life. When he heard I was trying to fix up the Thornwood place, he drove out with a truckload of supplies and refused to take any money. "Your grandfather saved my family's ranch back in 2008, he said, unloading lumber and roofing shingles from his truck. "Nah, lent us money when the bank wouldn't, never asked for it back. I've been waiting for a chance to repay that debt." He taught me how to patch a roof, how to replace rotted boards, how to tell the difference between damage that was cosmetic and damage that was structural. He was patient with my ignorance, never making me feel stupid for not knowing things I'd never had the chance to learn. Lorraine Phelps lived on the neighboring property with her family. She was a practical woman in her 40s who raised chickens and kept a vegetable garden that could feed an army. She started showing up once a week with fresh eggs and vegetables, and she taught me the basics of cooking real food instead of the instant stuff I'd grown up on in foster care. "You're too thin," she said the first time she came, looking me up and down with a critical eye. "And can't fight a war on an empty stomach." She was right. Slowly the ranch began to change. The house got cleaner, then stronger. I replaced broken windows, patched holes in the walls, painted over the water stains on the ceilings. I learned how to operate the old tractor that had been rusting in the barn, and I used it to clear the overgrown fields. I worked from dawn to dusk, my muscles screaming at first, then slowly adapting. My hands developed calluses that I wore like badges of honor. The foster kid who had never done a day of real work in her life was becoming something else, someone stronger, someone with purpose. But the legal battle dragged on, and some days the weight of it threatened to crush me. My uncle's lawyers were relentless. They challenged every piece of evidence we presented. They filed motion after motion, each one requiring time and energy to respond to. They tried to freeze my grandfather's assets, to prevent me from accessing even the small trust fund he had left me. The worst moment came in the 6th month. Preston showed up at the ranch unannounced. I was in the barn trying to repair the great doors that had hung broken for so long. The late autumn sun was warm on my back, and I was lost in the rhythm of the work, hammer rising and falling, nails biting into wood. I didn't hear the car until it was already in the driveway. I came out of the barn to find Preston standing there, his expensive suit completely out of place against the rustic backdrop of my grandfather's ranch. "Cousin Jessamine," he said, and his smile was all teeth. Or should I say niece? Well, family relationships are so complicated when you're basically a stranger. "You're not supposed to be here," I said. "The court order—" "I'm just visiting family property," he interrupted, taking a step toward me. "There's no law against that. Yet." He walked closer, and I had to fight the urge to back away. He was bigger than I was, older, stronger. And we were alone out here, miles from anyone who could help. "You know, I have to admire your stubbornness," he said, his voice casual but his eyes cold. "Garrett thought you'd fold in a month. I gave you 6 weeks. But here you are, playing farmer, pretending you belong here." He stopped a few feet away from me, close enough that I could smell his cologne, something expensive and sharp. "But the thing is, little girl, you don't belong here. You don't belong anywhere. Or you're a foster kid that nobody wanted. Not your parents, not your grandfather, not any of the families who took you in and then got rid of you when you became inconvenient. You're nothing. You have nothing. And when this is over, you'll have even less than that." The words hit like physical blows. Because part of me, the part that had been shaped by years of rejection and abandonment, believed them. But another part of me, the part that had grown stronger with every board I hammered and every field I cleared, refused to bend. "Get off my property," I said. My voice didn't shake. I was proud of that. "Your property?" He laughed, an ugly sound. "This will never be your property. Garrett and I have been planning this for years. We have more money, more power, and better lawyers than you could ever afford. It's only a matter of time before we take everything." "Get off my property," I repeated, "or I'll call the sheriff and have you arrested for trespassing in violation of the court order." He stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in his eyes. Not fear exactly, but maybe recognition. Maybe the first glimmer of understanding that I wasn't going to break. "This isn't over," he said finally. "No," I agreed. "It isn't." He left, and as I watched his car disappear down the driveway, I realized something that surprised me. I wasn't afraid anymore. The turning point came 2 weeks later. I was going through more of my grandfather's papers, sorting through boxes I hadn't touched yet, when I found something that stopped my heart. It was a cardboard box, hidden in the back of his closet behind a stack of old blankets and winter clothes. It was heavy, and when I dragged it out into the light, I saw that it was sealed with packing tape that had yellowed with age. Inside were letters, hundreds of them. They were addressed to me, to Jessamine Thornwood, care of every foster home I had ever lived in, every address the system had assigned me over the years. Some were addressed to the Department of Social Services, asking for information about how to contact me. Every single one was marked "Return to Sender." I sat on my grandfather's bed and read them one by one, tears streaming down my face until I couldn't see the words anymore. The earliest ones were from when I was 6, right after my mother died. He wrote about his grief, about how much he missed his daughter, and about how desperately he wanted to bring me home. He had tried, he explained in letter after letter. He had contacted lawyers, social workers, family court, but the system had deemed him too old, the ranch too remote, his health too uncertain. The letters continued through the years. He wrote to me on every birthday, telling me about the ranch, about the seasons changing, about the animals he raised. He wrote about his hopes for me, his belief that I was strong enough to survive whatever life threw at me. He never stopped, not once. Even in his final months, when his handwriting became shaky and uncertain, he kept writing. The last letter was dated just 3 weeks before he died. "My dearest Jessa," it read, "I am writing this knowing that I may not have much time left. The doctors say my heart is giving out, but I need you to know, if you ever read these words, that I tried. I never stopped trying. I never stopped thinking about you, not for a single day. The system wouldn't let me reach you, but I never gave up hope that someday, somehow, you would find your way home. I love you, sweetheart. I have loved you since before you were born, when your mother told me she was going to have a baby. I loved you when you were a little girl with pigtails, running through these fields like you owned them. And I love you now, wherever you are, whatever you've become. If you're reading this, then you found your way back. And I need you to know that this place is yours, not because of what's under the ground, because of what's in your heart. You are home now, Jessa. Finally, after all these years, you are home. I couldn't stop crying. Years of abandonment. Years of believing that nobody wanted me. Years of feeling like I was worthless and forgettable melted away as I held those letters in my hands. He had wanted me. He had loved me. He had fought for me the only way he knew how. And now it was my turn to fight. The next morning, I called Harding Calloway with new fire in my voice. "I'm ready," I said. "Whatever it takes. I'm not giving up. Not ever." "I know you're not," he replied, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. "And I have good news. Our investigator found something. An email from Garrett to Nova Lithium, sent 8 months before your grandfather died. He promised them the mineral rights the moment he gained control of the estate. He was planning to cut you out before Emmett was even in the ground. The evidence was devastating. It proved that my uncles hadn't just been opportunistic. They had been actively conspiring against me while their father was still alive. Can we use this?" I asked. "We can do better than use it," Calloway said. "This proves premeditated fraud. This isn't just about the inheritance anymore, Miss Thornwood. Your uncles committed crimes, and we're going to make sure they pay for them." The final court hearing came on a gray Thursday morning in November, exactly 9 months after I had first set foot on my grandfather's property. I sat at the plaintiff's table next to Harding Calloway, my heart pounding so hard I thought everyone in the courtroom must be able to hear it. I was wearing the nicest clothes I owned, a simple dress that May had helped me pick out, and my grandmother's pearl earrings that I had found in my grandfather's bedroom. Across from us, Garrett and Preston sat with their team of expensive lawyers. But something was different today. The confidence that had always radiated from them was gone. In its place was something that looked almost like fear. Calloway presented our case methodically, building it brick by brick: the geological survey, the correspondence with Nova Lithium, the testimony of my grandfather's doctor and his longtime friends, the letters he had written to me for 12 years, never giving up, never stopping, and finally the email. When the judge read the email aloud, the color drained from Garrett's face. Preston clenched his jaw so hard I could see the muscles jumping beneath his skin. "In light of this evidence," the judge said, her voice cold with barely contained anger, the court finds that Garrett and Preston Thornwood engaged in a deliberate pattern of fraud, deception, and conspiracy against their niece, Jessamine Thornwood. Their claims against the validity of Emmett Thornwood's will are hereby dismissed with prejudice." I gripped the edge of the table, hardly daring to breathe. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "the court orders Garrett and Preston Thornwood to immediately cease all claims to the Thornwood property and its mineral rights. They are to have no further contact with Miss Thornwood, directly or through intermediaries. Court costs and attorney fees are to be paid by the defendants, and this matter is hereby referred to the district attorney's office for investigation of potential criminal charges." I sat there unable to move as the reality sank in. After 9 months of fighting, of sleepless nights and backbreaking days, of moments when I wanted nothing more than to give up and disappear, it was over. I had won. Garrett and Preston were escorted out of the courtroom without looking at me. They had lost everything: their scheme, their money, their reputation, and soon, possibly, their freedom. Outside the courthouse, Harding Calloway shook my hand, his eyes bright with satisfaction. "Your grandfather would be proud of you," he said. "I know," I replied. And for the first time in my life, I believed it. In the weeks that followed, the phone started ringing. Nova Lithium was first. They offered $12 million for the mineral rights. $12 million. The number was so large I had to ask them to repeat it. Then came Frontier Mining with $15 million. Then Pacific Resources with $18 million. Yet each company tried to outbid the others. And each time the numbers climbed higher, I felt the weight of the decision pressing down on me. $18 million. I could walk away from this ranch, from the hard work and the uncertainty, and never worry about money for the rest of my life. I could travel the world. I could go to any college I wanted. I could be free. But I kept thinking about my grandfather's letters, about how he had turned down offer after offer, year after year, about how he had chosen this land over comfort, this home over wealth. He hadn't wanted to leave me money. He had wanted to leave me roots, so I said no. To all of them, every single offer. The lithium would stay in the ground. Not forever, maybe, but for now. Because what I was building here couldn't be bought with any amount of money. It had to be earned, one day at a time. The mining companies were shocked. Some of them thought I was crazy. Some of them thought I was holding out for a higher offer. But Harding Calloway understood. Emmett made the same choice, he said when I told him my decision. He could have been rich. He chose to be home instead. 1 year after I first set foot on my grandfather's property, I stood on the porch of my house and watched the sun set over the valley. The house was different now. The paint was fresh and white, gleaming in the evening light. The porch stood level and strong, no longer sagging under its own weight. The windows were clean and whole, reflecting the orange and pink of the sky. Smoke curled from the chimney, carrying the smell of the dinner I had learned to cook. The barn was different too. The roof was patched and solid, no longer threatening to cave in. The great doors were repaired and hung straight on their tracks. Inside, I had restored the stalls, preparing for the small herd of cattle I planned to buy in the spring. The land was different. The fields were cleared, the fences mended. I had learned which grasses grew best where, which parts of the property caught the most rain, which hills were good for grazing. I was still learning every day, making mistakes and figuring out how to fix them. But the biggest difference was in me. I had come here a girl who believed she was worthless, a girl who had been told over and over again that nobody wanted her and she would never amount to anything. A girl who had learned to expect nothing, hope for nothing, trust no one. Now I was a woman who owned her own land, who had fought for what was hers and won, who had built something with her own 2 hands out of ruins and neglect and years of abandonment. May Suttner came for dinner every Sunday now, bringing fresh bread and news from town. Gus Delacroix stopped by when he could, helping me with projects that were too big for one person. Lorraine Phelps had become like a second mother, teaching me not just how to cook, but how to live. They had become the family I never had, not connected by blood, but by something stronger, by choice, by the simple decision to care about each other, to show up, to help. The community of Crestwood Falls had accepted me as one of their own. I wasn't the foster kid anymore. I wasn't the stranger from somewhere else. I was Emmett Thornwood's granddaughter, the girl who had come home. I thought often about what inheritance really means. Tony, my uncles had seen it as a transaction, an asset to be liquidated, a number on a balance sheet. They had tried to reduce everything my grandfather had built to a $, but they were wrong. My grandfather didn't leave me a lithium deposit. He left me something far more valuable. He left me the chance to discover my own strength, to fight for something that mattered, to build a life with my own 2 hands. The land, the house, the quiet beauty of this valley. These were just the tools. The real inheritance was the lesson, that the value of a thing is not what it's worth. It's what you make of it. That home isn't a place you're given. It's a place you create. That family isn't just about blood. It's about the people who choose to love you and the people you choose to love back. I found my grandfather's river stone in my backpack one morning, wrapped in the same sock where I'd kept it safe for 12 years. The one he had given me that summer when I was 5, before my mother got sick, before everything changed. I put it on the mantle above the fireplace, next to a photograph I had found of my mother as a girl, standing in front of this very house with her parents on either side of her. My grandmother had died before I was born, but I could see myself in her face. The same eyes, the same stubborn, set to the jaw. We belonged here, all of us, the ones who were gone and the ones who remained. My grandfather taught me that the most valuable things in life aren't always buried in the ground. Sometimes they're buried in us. The strength to fight for what's right, the courage to build something from nothing, the wisdom to know that you are more than what other people say about you, more than your circumstances, more than your history. You are the author of your own story, even when someone else tries to write it for you. Thank you for walking this road with me. If this story touched your heart, I need you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button, because this channel is for people like us. People who know what it's like to be underestimated, overlooked, written off. People who found out they were stronger than anyone gave them credit for. And I want to hear from you. In the comments, tell me, Who left you the most important inheritance of your life? I'm not talking about money or property. I'm talking about the lessons, the love, the strength that got you through when everything seemed impossible. Maybe it was a grandparent who believed in you when no one else did. Maybe it was a teacher who saw something special in you. Maybe it was a stranger who showed you kindness when you needed it most. Share your story, because someone out there needs to hear it. Someone out there is feeling alone right now, feeling worthless, feeling like nobody cares. Your words might be exactly what they need to keep going. We're not just viewers here. We're a community. We're family, the kind that chooses each other. Until next time, remember, you are not alone. You never were. And somewhere out there, there's a place where you belong. You just have to be brave enough to claim it.